far below the potential that this could deliver. And so we need to have a longer-term vision of how these fuels can contribute. I'm not sure if that needs to be a target, but we need to understand from politicians also, okay, what is the view in the longer term in heavy transport, in shipping and aviation, because there electrification is not going to be a solution easily. And for the short term, we also need to make sure that permitting procedures can be shortened. Because it often takes too long to really scale up. So if we want to have advanced biofuels to be a solution for both against climate change and a solution also in relation to energy security for Europe, then I think we need to roll it out faster, and we need to have a perspective for the industry that their investments would make sense. That's what I would like to contribute here.
Thank you very much indeed. And we'll pick up on many of those points. Now let's go to Norway to speak with our online participant, Amrit Post-Melby of the Norwegian NGO Zero. You have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. I fully agree, of course, with the need to diversify and go for all solutions. I just have to say I hear an echo of myself. And in our view, in Zero, we need to prioritize the use of biomass for areas where there are no or few other renewable options. And in transport, the electrification is going rapidly. First half year of this year in Norway, 80% of new car sales was electric. And for commercial vehicles and vans, the shares are lower, somewhere between 20 or 30, but still the electrification is going rapidly, even for ferries and buses, excavators. And we also see the domestic short-distance aviation being electrified before 2040. But still, for longer distance and heavy transport, we are still needing a renewable fuel. That is especially relevant for aviation and marine applications, where, of course, hydrogen and ammonia are a big topic in the shipping area in Norway, and e-fuels in aviation, but also sustainable biofuels. And as was said in the beginning here as well, sustainability is, of course, key. And there was a couple of years prior to 2020 here in Norway where the market was flooded by crude palm oil biofuels. It was unintended from political side, and it met massive opposition both from the environmental NGOs and consumers. And it also ended up politically stranded or leveled the use and ambitions for biofuels in transport. So we are asking for stricter sustainability criteria in Zeros. One, we need sustainability criteria for all use of biomass, not only transport and energy, but also material and food. And with that, we could also solve the indirect and counterfactual debates we're having on the use of biomass today. And second, we need to close the door for using biomass feedstocks with high deforestation risk, no palm and no soy. And lastly, we should also incentivize carbon removals from the production of biofuels. The IPCC has shown that we are depending on removing carbon at large scale to keep within both 1.5 and 2 degrees warming. And the IEA showed in its net zero scenario that more than 40% of the biogenic carbon being captured in 2030 comes from the production of biofuels. So that's an area with possibilities.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Now I would like to give the floor to Marco Jan Hoonen for your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Sean. I'm here to represent the Advanced Biofuels Coalition, LSB. We are 11 companies from 8 member states promoting since 10 years the uptake of advanced biofuels technology and the markets, meaning the mandates and related issues. And I'm also representing UPM, which is a Finland-based forest industry company, and we operate advanced biofuels biorefinery already since 2015. I would maybe start by saying what really we try to concentrate on is creating green growth, boosting investments into creating the right framework in which we can become carbon neutral by 2050. And within this context, it's easy to say that advanced biofuels are kind of a no-brainer. We're talking about increasing our energy self-sufficiency. We are less dependent on Russian oil. There are no advanced biofuels to replace all of the fossil oil or the Russian oil, but let's use those means that we have. We are part of the circular economy. We are creating investments and innovations. And these biorefineries are not only for biofuels, they are also for biochemicals, biomaterials, for multiple end products, and really enabling to reduce emissions in the existing legacy fleet. So we're not against any other kind of way of reducing. It's another complementary way of reducing emissions. What we call for is obviously two issues. It's ambition and it's clarity of regulation. As was said before, what we need is more than a year of a directive that is in place. That is not the way we create green growth. That's not the way we create investment certainty. And therefore, as the co-legislators have been now increasing the targets, the REPowerEU has proposed to increase targets significantly. We of course are calling for increased mandates for the advanced biofuels. We see no reason why not. We can deliver certainly if there is the certainty. And also we see that the need for a mandate within the sustainable aviation fuels, refuel aviation regulation. But the third point would be really on this issue of certainty. And if I go back the 10 years that Advanced Biofuels Coalition has existed, and if I start counting how many months do we have when we were not in the process of either revising or anticipating the revision of the directive, that wouldn't leave too many months for me not to come to Brussels. And that's not a positive signal. I think if we really start analyzing that, most of the time we've been sitting around the table and discussing about revising, and we need a longer term view. Another example is of the complexity is the fact that when we actually made UPM investment decision in 2012 to invest a bit less than 200 million euros into a biorefinery, it would take me 10 minutes to explain the regulation. We have RED, back then it was RED 1. We have double counting, we have crude tall oil as a feedstock accepted. That's it. Today, I struggle to find somebody who can really explain me, and I try my best, the complexity of these regulations. We have 10 plus directives that build the business case from refuel aviation to maritime to taxation to alternative fuels infrastructure. I could continue, I think the audience knows this. But this is something that we really need to reflect on. How do we create the space for investments in the long term?
Well, thank you very much indeed. Just a reminder to our audience, both in the room and online, that you're warmly encouraged to submit any questions that you may have for our panelists. So now let's move to our Q&A section of today's conference. Maybe we can actually take the point that you made, Marco, about complexity. This idea that for industry it's very difficult to deal with this avalanche of regulation and so on. Bernd, maybe I can ask you, what's your take on this complaint that it's just too complex, this level of regulation?
Well, I mean, that's a very old complaint, that it's too complex. However, if you have very specific challenges, in particular if you have sustainability, or if you have a very complex energy system as we have, where we need different solutions and we need to address different challenges, then there is constantly also a call for first to set a framework which then allows investment. So and if there's none, I mean, there are different. We are always approached on this to create more, and I would say a specific good regulation which is clear helps investments overall. Obviously, we have the challenge that our environment is changing. So the challenge of climate change, or the urgency of climate change at least, was not maybe in the mind of everyone at all times, and therefore we need to increase the level of ambition. And each time a new legislative process is started, and in itself this leads to uncertainty, because questions which have been settled, there's always a certain risk that these are then reopened in this discussion. But this is in some extent inevitable, but we try to limit it, and we hope that the next time we can have a framework which lasts a bit longer than 1 year. This was also obviously a surprise for us, and I worked on the RED II negotiation. I did not expect to come back on this so soon, but it was necessary because the environment had changed.
Thank you. Niels, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, to go back to what Marco said about certainty and about the process of legislation, I have to admit that I think he's slightly on the right spot. If you look at what we have on the table and what's negotiated just these days, and influencing the decisions of UPM or anyone. First of all, LULUCF, it's in the trialogues today. It's actually saying how much you can use of the sink. We have the RED, where we are going to vote next week in Strasbourg with a compromise, reading between the lines what Marco just said. He doesn't really like the writing of it. Then we have nature restoration coming up. We have the taxonomy, which is a mess as such, because all of a sudden you speak about something which should be good and nice and clean, and all of a sudden you have gas and nuclear there. So I think we have created something which is something of a monster. And for politicians to navigate this monster is not very easy. And I think the reason to this monster being born is actually the triangle I mentioned before, and all of a sudden the issue of biodiversity coming in. And biodiversity became immensely ideologized. And where you have a tendency, and it's you have the tendency in the Commission almost every time, that one size is going to fit all. And that's not a very good approach. So when you look at biodiversity, you have different forms of biodiversity in every single member state. You have different forms of biodiversity, of course, in Europe. You have different forms of biodiversity all over the world. If you look at the hotspots, the biodiversity hotspots, I think we have one international biodiversity hotspot in Europe. But we are discussing the issue as if doomsday would be around the corner. And I must say, I find this, that's how politics is run, but I sometimes find this very stupid. We need to see that we need different approaches. I was in a debate on the same issue, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, and all of a sudden a environmental lawyer said that you can't expect from the European Union that we would take all the different member states into account, because it would be too difficult. And then I said, oh shit. Because if you aren't able to take the different circumstances into account, you are bound to make decisions that are going the wrong way.
Thank you. Carlo, I believe you'd also like to comment on this.
Yeah, especially on the biodiversity aspects. I think it's of course been long in the biofuels debate, and it's important. And it's also for that reason that there is a very strict sustainability criteria already on the fuels that are being produced and put on the market. And on the other hand, at the feedstock side, you can have local regulations to safeguard the sustainability and the biodiversity as well. So I don't think this should be a problem because it's already manageable and there's very strict rules that you have to adhere to. And within that rules, you can just ask the industry to provide as much as possible renewable fuels, rather than the other way around and thinking, okay, these fuels could lead to these impacts, and then let's close the doors to these options. While I would propose not to close the doors in the categories, not to close the doors to categories, but rather say, these are strict criteria and everything that is put on the market, fossil fuels as well, have to adhere to these strict criteria. And I think now we see that biofuels have these strict criteria, but increasingly are held responsible for impacts that happen in other sectors, that happen when waste and residues are not being used anymore in other sectors. And while actually the regulation is quite good in biofuels, it should, and I think I heard it also in what Bernd's opening statement, that actually there will also be more requirements being set to also other sectors of the economy, and I think that's also a good thing. But so in short, I think that we have the rules. Let's just increase the amount of renewable fuels and not the other way around.
Marco, I'll give you the chance to respond to what you've heard.
Yeah, just quickly, and maybe still on the issue of complexity, and my main concern with regard to that is that it's making it very difficult for smaller companies to enter this business, SMEs. I mean, big companies like UPM, we can handle these various requirements relatively easily, but we're leaving out a huge innovation potential, which is actually in the smaller companies. And that should be a major concern, because a lot of innovations de facto come from smaller companies than the bigger ones. So this is an important point. But on the issue of sustainability, this is really why we are here, why as part of the Advanced Biofuels Coalition, I mean, sustainability is at the core of our operations. We have to be able to, every step of the way, show our customers, our stakeholders, our clients, the regulators. And it is true, I mean, UPM is a good example. We have 6 big different business areas, from paper to pulp to timber to label stock. If I compare the sustainability criteria and the requirements, they are completely in different stratosphere, which we have to take seriously, which we will comply with, and that's really the basic requirement. But there are, of course, limits to where you can take it in order not to risk the future investments.
Anne, I'd like to bring you into the discussion. There's, just to pick up on a point that was made, so there's often a charge that the discussion around biofuels is driven by ideology more than science, and that some of the criticisms of biofuels are based on a sort of ideology. What do you make of this criticism? Is the opposition to biofuels more ideological than scientific?
No, I don't really think so, but biofuels is one of the harder climate solutions maybe to discuss, as biofuels is not really just biofuels. It's many different feedstocks and very different value chains as well. And if you're looking at it in a broader perspective, we have come really quite far on biofuels because we have stringent sustainability criteria that I of course think should continue to evolve to other sectors and be even stricter. But we actually have sustainability criteria that also are third-party verified. So I don't think it's ideological, but I think it's a harder debate because it involves so many different feedstocks and value chains.
Okay, thank you. I want to take a question from the floor, which has come in on Slido. This is from Jeppe Poulsen. Apologies if I mispronounced your name. It says, assuming strict sustainability criteria, isn't advanced biofuels a highly scarce resource only to be deployed when no alternatives are available? Any numbers on EU technical potentials and what demand can be met? Maybe Carlo, I can ask you.
I think it's very clear that there is actually a very large potential of waste and residues, liquid cellulose and biomass that could be mobilized both in Europe and abroad. And a study by Imperial College of last year showed, I think, some 150 MTOE of resources, which could, more than that, but it would deliver about 100 MTOE of fuels. And those feedstocks in Europe are all based on sustainable agricultural residues and forestry residues. So there is a very large potential there. And if you look at global studies, the potential is different between the different studies. There are very conservative studies that only focus on the waste and residues, and they come to still about 1/6 of the global energy supply, which is enormous. And if you would put that to use, if we have to put that to use, it could even be double the global energy use of this moment, but that would require really investments in sustainable agriculture. So it's actually not where sustainability and potential would clash with each other. You can only do it if you do it in a sustainable way, and I think we need to build that in as well, that we also have a better feedstock strategy to mobilize that feedstock that is available in Europe and abroad. And I think there's really a lot that can be mobilized, and if you have these strict sustainability requirements that are referred to, then I think the industry will be able to comply with that.
Mm-hmm. Niels, I'll give you the floor.
Just to come back to the reality, and this comment doesn't mean that these guys aren't sort of coming from the reality. But if you go outside here in Brussels, the house where I'm living, there are 4 apartments. Every apartment have a single burner. It's a catastrophic technological solution, because the amount of CO2 coming out from every single flat in the capital of Europe is of a catastrophic amount. But how do you change it? If I would go to the 14 different organizations in Brussels and say, oh, you need to have a district heating system, they would throw me out to the window from the 4th floor, because it would be too costly. But when we speak about the amount of biofuels used in Brussels, or in Netherlands, or in France, for heating single apartments, we are speaking about huge amounts. And those amounts are outside this discussion. If you go to a small village in Lapland, Finland, they have a central heating system, a district heating system. But that's not taken into account because EU isn't able to take into account different circumstances. And this is actually eating the resources Carlo was speaking about. And just to make things even worse, we had a very friendly discussion with DG Energy. It was certainly, I think, in December or November. And the signal we got from DG Energy, they didn't say it because they can't do it, is that we are slightly pushed aside. And then 2 months, 3 months after they being pushed aside because they didn't fit into this discussion, we have the war in Ukraine. And therefore I said, we have a lot of elephants in the rooms. And some of the rooms are pretty close to this venue. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take another question from the floor. This one is from Joanna Granger, who works in the Australian Embassy. Joanna writes, to reduce complexity in the legislation, could the framework move to an outcomes focus? That is, set the targets, objectives and sustainability criteria, and then let industry work out how to deliver. This could offer flexibility and recognizes no one size fits all. Bernd, what do you think of this comment?
Well, to some extent, we have such a framework. I mean, it depends on all different questions. Some we have very maybe narrower requirements, but generally, if you look at the Renewable Energy Directive, you have targets. You have even for overall a renewable target for the whole EU, which is then met with contributions on the different member states, which takes into account the different situation of the member states. And generally, in all aspects of this energy, we have flexibilities for the member states. But for some questions, there is a kind of a harmonized standard, in particular for biofuels, sustainability, to have a kind of a common denominator that it also allows in trade of biofuels, because otherwise every country would do its own sustainability criteria, and then you would not be able to have a common European market of this. So I think we're not so far away from that. Well, in the detail, you can always differ in your assessment where we are, but I think that's generally the European approach.
Okay, thank you. Marco, I'd actually like to ask you about a comment you made. So you've been critical of what you've described as a silver bullet approach to policy making. Can you elaborate on what you mean by this?
Thanks. Well, I guess it relates to the fact that are we really operating with technology neutrality in our mind? Are we looking for easy solutions that are technology neutral, or are we looking, what is the perspective as well? Are we talking about, how to do this in the 2030s, 40s, 50s, which is very different from how to do it now? Maybe two examples on this. Biofuels, whether first generation and advanced biofuels and all the means that we have today really are the solution in the 2020s and early 30s. Even if we have 50 million electric cars or 100 million electric cars by 2030 and more along the way, we will have the legacy fleet. We will have 150 or 200 million internal combustion engine. And are we with today's decisions ensuring that we will have sustainable fuels, renewable sustainable fuels to replace fossils in the 2030s? With the ICE ban, we are obviously taking a risk of not incentivizing the investments that would be supporting reducing emissions in those sectors in the 2030s, because investments take time, there's a long lead time, etc. And maybe on this silver bullet policy, another example is, though, I'm very excited about the Commission plans on hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, green hydrogen, big opportunities for industry. They are linked in many ways also to the production of advanced biofuels. But we have a 2030 target today, which is discussed, which is massive. It's bigger than for advanced biofuels by far. It's over 8 million tons. Today we have minimal production in reality. And we have 0% of the regulation ready to comply with the 2030 target. That is silver bullet policy. I mean, we don't have the framework conditions for me to go to the bosses in the company and say, this is how we can invest. Again, it will be, well, here's the target that they've been discussing, but actually we don't have the nitty-gritty details. And in today's world, if it hasn't become clear from my earlier interventions, it's the nitty-gritty that matters, that we really need to understand to be able to move forward with the investments.
Thank you. Anne, I'd like to go to you. Just on this question of technology neutrality in policy making. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of criticism that the approach taken towards road transport favors electrification over everything else. Some are in favor of this, others are against it. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think that the move towards electrification is problematic, or do you think it's the right way to go?
I definitely think that is the right way to go. It's the most energy efficient way to go. And in Norway, we actually have a renewable power system, and we're actually also well on the way of having new car sales being all renewable in 2025. So really early. So I don't believe technology neutrality is the way forward, but still I fully agree on the silver bullet approach that Marco is explaining. We are not, and I wish we could be in a situation where we could just stand still, assess, analyze, and contemplate what climate solution is the best. But we are in no way in that situation anymore. The climate crisis isn't even around the corner, it's right in front of our eyes. And the use of fossil fuels are so enormous that I'm in no doubt that we need to go for all available climate solutions, including sustainable biofuels, but still for the areas where electrification is going slower.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a reminder, if you would like to submit a question and you're here in the room, please scan the QR code and you can submit your question on Slido. Thank you very much. There should be one on a chair next to you. The issue is with microphones, etc. Carlo, I believe you also wanted to come in on that point. I'll give you the floor.
I agree with Anna that we should try to close the tap on fossil fuels as soon as possible, and I think we've mentioned that for over a decade, if not 20 years, and we didn't, and now somebody else is doing it for us. That's one thing. And if we had done those investments last year, maybe it seems that those investments in renewable fuel options would have been expensive. But I think in the light of today, the cost price, the production cost price of advanced biofuels is basically lower than what we're paying at pump for the fossil fuels. Of course, you will see also market dynamics. So I don't know how this plays out in a scarce, in an environment where these fuels are still scarce. So the price will be high, but the production costs are low. And I would like to also react on the statement of Anna on electric vehicles. And I think that is a highly desired solution. So maybe also our next car will be an electric car, very well possible. But I live in a house that also has a charging point next to it. I think the charging infrastructure for electric driving also has to improve greatly. And not just in Norway. I believe that in Norway it works perfectly. And Germany and the Netherlands can also afford it. But electric cars at the moment are very expensive still. And I don't know if it's also affordable for the citizens in South and East Europe. So that means, for me, I think that we need to focus indeed on increasing the electrification of passenger vehicles, and that we need to make that attractive. But at the same time, that's not a silver bullet. RFNBO's e-fuels are not a silver bullet. Advanced biofuels are not a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets. I agree with Marco. And we need to have all the solutions, and we need to basically increase the level of renewable fuels while closing the tap on fossil as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. I want to go to Bernd and then Niels, but Bernd, I'll give you the floor first.
Yes, maybe to coming back on this question of technology neutrality. I mean, I think one needs to have a balanced approach there. If you're completely technology neutral, it means kind of you have no strategy. We also need to have a strategy, and if there is an understanding on how to achieve carbon neutrality in the long term, and it is clear that this is not just easily done, this is something which is very difficult. I think there needs to be some strategy underlying the policies in which direction it goes. Otherwise, there's also not a good case for investments, because also such a strategy must to enable investments. And one example, for instance, that we have a sub-target for advanced biofuels. This is also not completely technology neutral. I mean, obviously you have different technologies to produce advanced biofuels, but you have this specific measure which takes into account that those are more expensive than maybe some other new technologies, and that's the very reason. The same is for general transport, that we know that in certain sectors electrification is the way to go, and we need to direct it in this direction.
Niels, I'll give you the floor.
At the beginning of this term, some 3.5 years ago almost, I tried to have a rational approach to all the problems we were seeing at the horizon. And therefore, what Marco said about lead time for investments was something very central in that thinking. My take on it was that an investment cycle for a normal company is about 15 years. So from 2020 up to 2050, we would have 2 investment cycles. Then we might have smaller cycles underneath when you are repairing or some new technology coming in. But in general terms, we saw at that time 2 investment cycles, and we would have actually needed sort of a policy taking into account the investment cycles and doing a framework for that. That didn't happen. Instead, we are in a process, as was already pictured also, that we are doing it over and over again. Sort of, this is the 3rd time I'm in, during 10 years, I'm doing the RED, which is, and a new RED, the RED 4th, is around the corner because that actually came already from the Commission. So we are doing things in a way which is not taking into account the investment cycles. Then, yes, I think my next car will be a electrical, but I know that there are shortcomings. Last year in December, I drove from Brussels to Stockholm and then to Finland. That happened to be during a day when you had a snow blizzard in Denmark and southern Sweden. What happened with the electrical cars? They were stuck there. I had my diesel with renewables and I went steadily sort of on. And that's part of the reality. So, and when we know that we're going to have challenges also with electrification. Why? Because we don't see the materials for the batteries for more than the 1 generation in the front of us. So, yes, we know that we need to do something, but it's not very easy to do that because there are going to be bottlenecks in the processes, and we have to be able to get through those bottlenecks, and that's not going to be very easy.
Thank you. Well, just looking at the time, I do want to talk about aviation as well, particularly Refuel EU Aviation. Before we do that, there is a question from the floor. This has the most upvotes, and it's for you, Marco. It's from Gabriele Tatian. It says, how does the increasing of biofuels mandates match with the Commission's recommendation to the member states to reduce the biofuels mandates in the context of food versus fuel debate?
That's a good question. Advanced biofuels that I'm representing in the Advanced Biofuels Coalition are made from waste, residues, some oftentimes, let's take an example, UPM is producing renewable diesel, advanced renewable diesel and naphtha from crude tall oil, which is a residue of pulp manufacturing from our own and some external pulp mills. Nobody deliberately produces it. It's a residue of the process. We have companies like Clariant in our coalition, which has just now started up a new biorefinery in Romania, producing lignocellulosic ethanol from agricultural residues. We have Enerchem, which is looking at investments in both Spain and the Netherlands on biogenic fraction of the municipal solid waste. So we're really looking at the circular economy. We're looking at not at creating value from residues and waste. And this is at the core, and that's why we have the annex that defines these feedstock that are considered to be safe and sound from that perspective. So that would be my answer.
Well, thank you very much. As I mentioned, I'd now like to talk about Refuel EU Aviation, which of course is the EU's green jet fuel law. So this will soon, there's already trilogues set to get underway on Thursday. Bernd, maybe I can ask you, was it a mistake not to include a sub-mandate for advanced biofuels? I'm talking about Part A of Annex 9 in Refuel EU. And if it wasn't a mistake, what was the thinking behind not including a mandate?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm working for DG Ener, and so it's a bit limited what I can say about that. But generally, we consider that we need to kind of strike a balance what to include under Refuel EU and what not to include. And we decided not to include first generation biofuels because we didn't want to have a new market. But on the other hand, we have Annex 9, which are waste-based or mostly waste-based feedstocks, where we really have a policy to push for that, and aviation is a sector where we have a future-proof demand for renewable. So it's a priority to have these biofuels in aviation, and therefore we consider it's a good place to have both advanced and also Annex 9 Part B biofuels in the mandate. And it would have simply increased then the complexity than to have another sub-target within a kind of a sub-target. So one has to strike the right balance there. And on top of that, we thought that if we have then under the Renewable Energy Directive a general framework which provides further incentives to produce particularly advanced biofuels with this sub-application there, which also has to be met, and to which the biofuels used in aviation count, and then a specific multiplier for the counting of those. This together would provide the right incentives to bring also advanced biofuels specifically in the aviation sector.
Mm-hmm. Marco, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to what you've heard.
Well, I think the statement on not creating complexity was maybe contradictory, but really what we're looking at is investment certainty. The Commission has made a proposal which is pretty much accepted by the co-legislators on banning the sale of internal combustion engine cars by 2035. That is sending a really strong message to the industry, and it's obviously sends a question that whether you are investing in that sector or some other sector. And if then you need to look at the transport modes and the end segments that you can produce from your biorefinery, advanced biofuels biorefinery. It's quite obvious that maritime and the aviation sector, together with heavy duty, will be the main sectors in the future, together with obviously whether it's bioplastics or petrochemical biomaterials. But what we actually are calling for as the Advanced Biofuels Coalition, when we say that we would like to see a dedicated mandate, it's really about investment certainty, that you can explain that there is this room for your products. We know that we are accepted within the definitions today, but to really create an incentive to fill that mandate would be quite important. Because the refuel aviation is quite special in the sense that it goes all the way up to 2050. And that's a really important signal, definitely, to the industry. So we salute definitely the 2050 perspective here, because that is needed. Maybe a longer perspective would be possible within RED as well. But that's a good thing, and that's why we did it. That's why we're calling for a specific mandate, really, to create the stronger incentive to invest.
Well, I want to take kind of a step back and just, I mean, we're talking about specific inclusion of certain feedstocks and what is eligible and what's not. And there's a lot of discussion about the sustainability of these feedstocks. But this is somewhat surprising because surely it's a scientific question, what is sustainable and what isn't. But we hear information from some NGOs, we hear information from industry. There seems to be a lot of differing views on the sustainability. Maybe I can ask you, Anne, what do you think? Why do we see such differing interpretations of what feedstock is sustainable and what isn't from NGOs and industry, in your opinion?
Well, one answer is what I stated previously on basically the different value chains and the different situations in the different countries where we use different biofuels. Back in 2018, 2019, the Norwegian market was basically just crude palm oil biofuels, unintendedly, and luckily that is not the case anymore, while other countries had a very different situation. But I also think another explanation is the system boundaries. We're not really discussing the same system boundaries. And to solve that, we need to have criteria in other sectors as well, because there are indirect effects of biofuels, but those effects should be treated directly in the sectors where they are happening. So I think those system boundaries and what actually is the base of the discussion is also a big part of the problem.
Thank you. Carlo, I'd like to ask you the same question. Why is there this scientific debate over what's sustainable and what isn't in terms of feedstocks?
Yeah, I agree with Anna that actually all these indirect effects should primarily be addressed in the sectors where they occur. And so if you would have much less deforestation and no expansion into peatlands, the GloBiome study, that's the main ILUC study, showed that ILUC becomes virtually inexisting. So it will cease to exist. There will not be any really measurable or modelable ILUC impact if there would be no deforestation and no expansion of agricultural land in peatland. So while we are having very strict requirements on the sustainability of biofuels, and these have been negotiated and discussed with the NGOs at the table and with industry, etc. And maybe they could be stricter on some aspects. I don't know. That we would like to understand what is the real problem. But then I think it's problematic that while you're making this strict sustainability framework for one sector, that you're holding that same sector responsible for other sectors not addressing, for failing to address the same sustainability issues. So that is, that I suppose that is a dilemma. I think that, well, going back to my earlier statement, climate change is the most urgent thing here, and so we need to make sure that we that we have good requirements, but that we at the same time also increase the demands. And I think that can go hand in hand with increasing sustainability, both on with requirements at the point where the biofuels are entering the market, setting the certification requirements, etc., as well as having more strict rules on the agricultural practices, for example, in European countries. And that happens also at the moment.
Thank you, that's interesting. Maybe just in terms of what we consider sustainable, in terms of the Renewable Energy Directive update, and Niels, maybe I can ask you. So the original proposal from the rapporteur, MEP Marcus Pieper of the EPP group, it had a 5% advanced biofuels mandate, but this was diluted. Why was the 5% target watered down, do you know?
Because we didn't find a majority. That's the usual reason in the parliament. If you don't find a majority for something, then we need a point of view for the trialogue. So therefore, in this situation, there was no majority, feasible majority for this issue. And you could actually illustrate it by going through the pellets market, because the pellets market is actually, from many perspectives, quite interesting. We don't know how sustainable the pellet market is, because some of it comes from Canada, some of it comes from the US, some of it comes from member states where the control over what's going on in the forest is sort of slightly smallish, to be nice, in comparison with Finland and Sweden, where we almost, the only thing we haven't done so far, we haven't give separate names to the different trees in the forest, because we know very clearly what kind of forest you have. So you can't actually do anything in that forest without that being noted. There are some mistakes with big headlines. I think one in Sweden in 10 years. But the problem is that a pellet is something very different in different circumstances. So how do you phrase a sustainability criteria for pellets when you don't know from where they come and for what purpose they are used? If they are used in a system producing electricity and heat for in a closed system with the district heating, it's one thing. If it's burned in an apartment in Brussels, it's a totally different thing. So sustainability criteria are pretty problematic.
Carlo, go ahead.
I somehow fail to understand it completely, because I think at the moment where the biomass is being used in the permitting of the factories, there should be rules to the emissions that these have. If biomass would be used in a city environment, I don't know if that happens anywhere in Europe, but maybe it does, then I suppose you should also set requirements to the emissions and also to the furnaces in the houses. Yes, of course, but I don't understand how you would use those arguments to basically limit the option. Why not, if you know what is the sustainability issue, if you know what is the concern, why not make a clear rule? And if the concern relates to the feedstock production, make a rule there. And then you can address basically the supply chain. If the concern relates to the end user, then I think you should set a requirement either to the vehicle or to the combustion installation, etc. Yeah, I'm not a politician, so for me, it's more simple. I'm not bound to the emotions per se here, but I find it difficult. I think that you could do it much less complex in a way.
Thank you. I do want to take another question from the floor. This was the most upvoted. It's from Emmanuel from CEPSA. Regulatory certainty is key to unlock investment decisions to Bernd. When can we expect the update of Annex 9 list of feedstock, including Part A qualifying for the advanced biofuel sub-target?
Well, we're working on this, and we are finalizing it, and we hope that we can over the next week publish a draft. But yeah, still some work is necessary.
Marco, I believe you want to comment.
Yeah, I think this is a really important issue. Also, the ITRE committee of the European Parliament has made a call for, in case there is a revision and new feedstock are included into Annex 9 Part A, that there would be a subsequent consideration of increasing the mandate. And this is really important. And I think, therefore, it would be important to have the delegated act published in time for the trialogues, because that's the only moment you can actually increase the mandate, unless you want to have RED 4 soon after, which is probably not the case. And therefore, we really call for urgent action, so this could be done in the trialogues. There's a lot of talk about for the need to increase ambition. There's a lot of talk about decreasing our dependence, so now's the momentum in the trilogues. We have high hopes for these discussions.
Thank you. Well, I'm actually curious, Niels, just while you're here, regarding the trilogues, there's been discussion. If we fast forward for the Renewable Energy Directive trilogue, where do you see the sticking points between the Council and the Parliament? What will be the most difficult topics to get an agreement on, in your opinion?
Well, I think most or a lot of member states feel the pressure from the energy market of today. If you look at the price of gas for the moment being skyrocketing, why? Because of actually Germany buying a lot of gas after, was it July 23rd, when they sort of said this is the second phase of the alarm bell, and then you see the curve going up, and that's hurting a lot of member states quite a lot. So finding solutions where we can see that we are able to keep the price at some normal, close to normal level, that will be one of the sticking points. And then just to come back to the annex issue, I think the wisdom of the politicians was not to put their fingers into the Annex 9, because then I think we would be caught with our fingers in the honey, and that would be good. We weren't. I don't think we could have the wisdom to go into an Annex 9 and then vote what is a good feedstock for anything there. So I think we had some sense of reality in those seconds.
Marco, would you like to comment?
Definitely a good decision, Niels, and fully support it.
The only one.
No, not the only one.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at the time. We are coming towards the close of our event, but I would like to ask you, I mean, maybe Carlo, this is relevant for you. So, I mean, we're in an extraordinarily difficult moment in terms of the energy system. I mean, people are worried about how they're going to fuel their car, how they're going to heat their homes. You mentioned that you see much more scope for advanced biofuels than perhaps others have said. But can I ask, what effect would increasing the level of advanced biofuels in the energy and fuel mix have? Would it exacerbate or calm the energy price crisis, in your opinion?
I think that you could scale it up within a few years, because the technology is there, the potential is there. And then if you would really go to a significant scale, it could have an impact, and I think that it would calm down the prices. It would give us much more diversity in sources. If we're talking just about the 2.2%, I don't think that is really going to make a significant difference. I don't think you will see that. So, and actually even, yeah, I understand that in the Parliament you've been discussing 5%, but if we see that the potential is maybe 30% and sustainable, then yeah, I don't see why we should not introduce this form. It would give an additional volume of fuels on the market, and it would over time really replace fossil fuels and so bring, and of course renewability comes at a cost, but the costs are really lower than what we're paying today for the gas.
Well, thank you. I mean, looking at the time, we are coming to the close, but before we go, I would like to ask each of our panelists to give some closing remarks. So I'd ask you just to give a literally one-sentence summation of what you think is the most important aspect to keep in mind from today's debate. And maybe, Bernd, I would start with you, put you in the hot chair.
Well, I think what the most important is to take into account that we have a very complex situation, and we need to find a policy response to that, which takes, on the one hand side, the complexity into account, but is, on the other hand, also long-living and clear enough for everybody to agree and to make them the necessary steps.
Thank you. Niels, I'll give you the floor for your closing remarks.
Well, there is a lot of hype about hydrogen in the future. I said at some point that I don't think we have it on an industrial scale before 2035, but What we have today is a change of sea in price relations. And therefore what Marco said before about a perspective for investments, that's what we need, and we can do it. And we need to do it, because otherwise we will be in a pocket of a certain guy in Moscow, and we wouldn't probably like to be in that pocket.
Thank you. Carlo, your closing remarks, please.
Yeah, so indeed, I think we need the perspective for a longer term. So not just having 2030 and then not know what is behind it. I think that policymakers, the European Commission has perfect scenarios on the total volumes of renewable fuels that will be needed in the coming decades. And I think that should be much more advertised, and that also then you see how is the policy positioned in that. What are the typical fuels that we need, when will the volumes grow, but also maybe what will happen after that. So what will be the next strategy. So I would hope for more vision. I know there is a lot of vision, but specifically in this topic, I think we can use a bit more.
Thank you. Now, Anne, I'll give you the floor for your closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think that in order to reduce the use of fossil fuels in the scale that we need to go for all renewable solutions, and that advanced biofuels is one of those solutions that will be important to reduce emissions. And that the most important regarding biofuels is also to assess it in a broader perspective, to also solve the sustainability issues we are seeing in other sectors.
Thank you. And Marco, I'll give you the final intervention.
Thank you. I think this debate should be seen in a broader context than just advanced biofuels. It's really about how do we approach the solutions that we have. And while I'm extremely excited about the figures that Carlo has mentioned here and that we believe in as well, we can start now by really looking at what is feasible and sustainable. What do we have? What are the means that we can use in the short term? And then we will have new technologies, new opportunities developing. But I think the core is really, how do we boost green growth? How do we overcome the challenges that we have? And let's not look always further ahead. Let's look at the means that we have, where we have the infrastructure, where we have the feedstock, where we have the technologies, where we can really start making a change. And that would be my final statement.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Well, that brings us to the close of today's conference, but I would like to thank all of our panelists. I'd like to thank you watching at home or from the office. And of course, thank you to those who joined us in person as well. I believe if you want to watch this conference back, it will soon be online on the Euractiv YouTube channel. But that's all from us here at the Euractiv studio in Brussels. But in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.